r/AskReddit. What are gonna be the real consequences of COVID, like in 20 years? 20-year-olds rolling their eyes when their parents talk about COVID-19. I wonder how colleges, universities will be impacted. My college moved all its classes for the next 3 semesters online, and the first question that was asked was, will you be reducing tuition? I think if they don't, a lot of people won't be able to go to college or finish out their degrees. In 100 years they will be making memes about how the 20s of each century started with a plague. Edit. Row. My first comment to get over 1,000. Thanks guys. More jobs will become remote as employers realize it's more efficient. My worry is that more jobs might be pushed abroad to cheaper countries when employers realize jobs can be done remotely. Kids who are just starting school this year will have a completely different experience for the rest of the school life. If I recall correctly, there have been studies about the first few foundation years of school being a clear predictor for the rest of your learning life. No idea what will be different, just that these kids are not going to be like any other cohort of students. The kids of today will be paying financially for this. Hopefully we will be better prepared for the next inevitable pandemic. Conspiracy, or people believing that COVID was just a conspiracy and the millions that died never really existed. r/Historimums is gonna be popping. I work on a COVID ICU as a nurse. When our patients get discharged from the ICU, many of them will have lasting if not permanent conditions from this disease. It's really too early to tell how many survivors will have disabilities and how many will recover 100%. Simply being laid out on a ventilator for 20-30 days takes a while to recoup from. Should one suffer strokes, renal damage or impaired lung function, those conditions can follow them for the rest of their possibly shortened lifespan. Having a large number of people suddenly disabled and without employment-tied health insurance in falling economy is going to perhaps be a problem. We're only 2 months into this, so this is all wildest speculation, but retail has been teetering on the brink of death for years, and this is going to be the final nail in the coffin for a lot of it. Sure, things are reopening, but people aren't going to be jamming to fill the malls. Major clothing retailers that have a store in every mall might cut back to 1 or 2 per city. A lot of jobs just aren't going to come back. Same with restaurants. A lot of people, especially young people, are realizing how much money you can save cooking at home. A lot of servers aren't getting their jobs back. The economic slump is going to require a lot of stimulus, which means in 20 years, taxes are gonna be crazy. The socialization effects of young kids during this time. By the time children are 3 years old, 80% of their brain is wired, developed to accept love, how to play, how to learn, act. By age 5, 90% of their brain is wired. All the children who are missing out on a year or more of socialization could have unknown consequences. Strong family ties where they are afraid to leave home, a harder time making new friends, difficulty socializing, depression or other mental health issues later on in life. I know people think that keeping their 2 or 3-year-old home, even elementary kids, isn't a big deal, but having this time where they are kept inside and only seeing their parents and siblings is going to affect them in unknown ways 20, 30, 40 years down the road. I'm wondering if more people will move to the burbs. I've always loved my neighborhood in spite of having very little space and a tiny yard, but lately I've wished that we lived somewhere with a bigger yard, with trees, a driveway with a basketball hoop, room for home offices, etc. Especially if telecommuting becomes more common or if kids can't go back to school in the fall. A lot of low-paid essential workers are going to be bitter, rightfully so. I expect some changes are going to result from that whole situation. Companies will start saving money for emergency funds. Then new management will take over and spend all the money meant for emergencies on frivolous shit. An emergency will happen and the employees will suffer again. TBH, humans are such creatures of habit, so we'll inevitably go back to our old ways of not washing hands, going to crowded areas while sick, go on cruise ships, etc. Economically we'll change, but for the most part we'll go back to our carelessness much sooner than 20 years. I am guessing another baby boom might happen after the quarantine, so I guess we'll have another boomer generation. We're gonna use the opportunity to say okay boomer to teens and young adults by then, lol. Our generation will be the silly grandparents wiping down groceries before we put them away. Oh grandpa, you don't have to do that. I lived through COVID-19 back in 2020 and kept you alive. When I'm an old man, handshaking will probably be seen as a quaint traditional greeting that only old men who know each other closely will do. I think we'll have seen a real kick in the pants for the work at home initiative. A lot of that will be immediate, as management sees the arrangement working, and then I suspect we'll see another rise a couple decades down the line as the holdouts of office culture start to age out of their jobs and new management, who remembers working from home during COVID, steps into the role. This would have a ripple effect on a handful of markets. Office leases would probably have to work with renting smaller office spaces rather than huge I'll take the entire floor arrangements. Lots of food joints near the office districts will lose business as workers are starting to reliably just eat at home. You'd also see a decline in overall traffic and fuel consumption. Maid and janitorial services will likely see a decline in profits as well. Again, I imagine this to be a some now, some later situation, so we'll get shades of this pretty immediately after stay-at-home ends. On the flip, any office worker benefiting from this arrangement will see immediate personal savings in not eating out, coffee made at home and fuel unused. I have the sneaking suspicion that this whole scenario has resulted in countless I can't cook adults finally picking up a skillet and a chicken breast and amazing themselves with their newfound powers, which could again save money in the immediate personal way. I also imagine, given the spring timing of the situation, we'll have more than a few gardeners crop up as a result of this scenario. 2. A drop in demand for oil would likely result in lower oil prices. Which may make investors consider alternative power sources as business opportunities. It could go the other way, and some cheap fuel means that we see a boom in fossil fuel usage. But, given that there's already a lot of concern over climate change, there's some public opinion pressure to embrace green energy anyway. I do imagine that we'll see some political pressures mount from this scenario. The universal healthcare advocates will absolutely use this as ammunition for their case, and even more so if we get a second wave of infections. If Biden manages to beat Trump in November, he'd be able to score easy political points through measures as simple as reinstating the pandemic response team, and he almost certainly will. Since COVID is so infectious, there's a very good chance the majority of people will get infected sooner or later. Slowing that rate will absolutely improve outcomes by keeping more hospital beds free, but over the course of the next year there will still undoubtedly be a lot of deaths, particularly in the elderly or other high-risk populations. This may be enough to play hob with carefully gerrymandered districts in the US, and could in itself have far-reaching impacts on American politics for the next couple of decades. Also, designer face masks will briefly be a thing. Surprised I haven't seen anyone mention this so far. We're going to have this noticeable gap in some parts of our cultural library. Some seasons of TV will be cut short. We won't see new TV created during this period, so the next year or two may have seasons postponed or shows cancelled that wouldn't have been. And that's nothing to say of the shows that kept going with massive changes. 20 years from now, when people are binge-watching, say, Saturday Night Live, they're going to hit this moment when everything gets really weird. There are movies that got pushed back, shifted to streaming, or might get shelved altogether. There are likely albums that were supposed to be recorded this year that won't, so there will be a gap there. Some video games have already been pushed back and more may be. On the contrary side, we might see things like books take a bit of an uptick with people being stuck at home and able to write more, paintings, sculptures and other physical art, etc. A huge spike of long-lasting mental illness. The suicide hotlines are up 1000% right now. Being cooped up inside for so long is breaking people down. Unfortunately, the anxiety and depression people are developing will last. Getting your shot every year. From an emergency management perspective, 9/11 and Katrina swung the pendulum towards favoring federally led responses to large disasters. The COVID response and federal bungling will be viewed as the beginning of a shift of responsibility, capability, and ownership back to state and local leaders, for better or worse. Hopefully it'll encourage people to be more hygienic. One thing I think would need to change is the standard of toilets, bathrooms in bars and pubs. The amount of pubs I've been to where the sinks aren't working or they don't have soap was always a bit inconvenient. But now I think they might be forced to improve it. Some places might need a fairly large scale renovation to improve their sanitary quality, and that isn't exactly ideal, seeing as they would be struggling for money once they are allowed to reopen. I'm hoping it just becomes another virus that has been cured though, rather than something that causes issues long term. 5-10 plus years. COVID-19 has held up a mirror, and the reflection is ugly. I truly hope that individuals demand better of their representatives and their employers after this. The amount of power local governments have gotten away with exercising with no consequence will set a precedent that will see enormous polarization in America's politics to a frightening level. I work in construction. A lot of different inspections are being done via FaceTime, Skype, and they are very easy to fudge. There will be issues with buildings not being up to code as a result of COVID-19. Overall, I think there are a lot of positives to come of COVID-19. Nations of the world work together to combat a global threat. When you step back and think about that, it's some damn uplifting news that could springboard much more global cooperation. The only thing I'm worried about are future sanctions on China and how that may pan out. There's plenty of negative press coming out about China. There's real news. There's fake news. There's real news disputing the fake news. And there's fake news disputing the real news. COVID-19 has been dominating the news cycle and covering up most of the Hong Kong protests. Taiwan seems to be back in the news amid the crisis as well, which may be a sign of China losing their grip. Right now every nation is dealing with their own COVID crisis issues, but China will rise back into the spotlight quickly. There are some serious allegations of human rights violation coming from China. We'll be unearthing COVID-era scandals all over the world for a few years, and depending on how quickly it happens and how much this excavation impinges on China, we could be in for a world conflict. I'm mostly concerned that China will try to reign in control of Hong Kong and Taiwan, and it won't be peaceful. Other world armies either will or won't get involved, and either way it'll be devastating. If that's what happens, COVID-19 will be in the history books as a catalyst leading up to the conflict. People will judge the mishandling of the pandemic, saying that the leaders of the world failed humanity. Relentless complaints about the debt accrued from economic relief packages are too heavy for future generations to bear. The hatred against Chinese, I think. I'll bet you that it will be treated as a historical event and kids will study it in textbooks. Not so much a consequence but more of a benefit. Now that the world has been dependent on an internet structure that couldn't cope with the load for the past few months, I expect some major boosts to internet service and speeds. Schools will be a nightmare. After this, they will probably add a whole bunch of restrictions that will just add more strain to children's mental health. Ugh, I can't imagine. One good thing, way lower cold and flu rates. Starting next year, the hand-washing protocol is being burned into people's brains. Public masks will be standard for people in the West the way they have long been in Asia. There is going to be a lot of good data about what happens when people shut down the modern world temporarily. We are living in very unique times and researchers will probably get a chance to learn some really cool things. Honestly, not much. People tend to forget, for lack of a better word, things like this fairly quickly when the next big distraction comes along. I'm sure the world will be different, but I don't think much will change as a direct impact of this. Learning delays in children. There is gonna be a huge backlog in children not making academic gains, so the next couple months of school will be making sure students are catching up because there's a chance that a good chunk of these kids aren't learning at home. The fact that the economy is, to put it mildly, severely disrupted. Movies theaters have been tanking, but after this they'll pretty much be rendered useless since they are no longer being provided exclusivity. Trolls 2 was released online. They're not going to be around for much longer, so enjoy them while you still have them in your town or city. In my opinion, I love them. But if they have to go, let's just bring back drive-ins. Not everyone wants to stay in to watch a movie. I like going out to watch them, and drive-ins are so nostalgic and fun. Edit. Honestly, regarding the comment of not all them tanking into the pits, I sure hope so. I love going to the movies, and those bigger companies should stay in business. As for the other one saying nothing good coming out recently, I feel you on a molecular level. I so desperately want to replace every boring unoriginal old director and writer and replace them with ambitious young inspiring artists, writers and directors, so that maybe we can get some good media instead all the same old stupid recycled garbage they spew out at us. I haven't visited a movie theater in a freaking year. All you can eat buffets are seriously going to suffer. The new trend will all you can eat. But ordered. Whoa, you made it to the end? You're a ducking beast. I'll cut you a deal. Smash like and subscribe for more curated content, bruh. It's free and that's a great price.